Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the inaugural lecture of Prof. Storbeck. Can I please ask you to stand as we welcome the procession inside the venue? Thank you so much. Over to you, Prof.
Colleagues, friends, family, good evening. Welcome to Stellenbosch University. We know it's a very wet and cold evening, but we're here to celebrate a colleague and a friend and his achievements. Please just be patient with him. He's not even making eye contact. Every so often I stood and I had to remind him, breathe, breathe. We're looking forward to this. So as I've said, welcome to our rectorate as well. Prof. Nico, Prof. Sibu, Prof. Sam, and Dr. Ronald, welcome. To our faculty leadership, the departmental leadership, and all of you, welcome. I've been asked to, in particular, special welcome to the Dr. Storbeck's mother, Sue, and his wife. And he warned me, I cannot forget you, to thank you. Trish, so welcome. You must be very proud tonight. To our colleagues and friends online, in particular his father-in-law, Mike. He said that was a very, very important one to welcome as well. His sister-in-law, Angela. His sister, Heidi, and family joining from Chicago. His brother, Gunther, and family from Belfast. And his UK collaborators joining online. Welcome to all of you. It's always difficult to introduce our colleagues when they do these lectures, because this is really a celebration of a lifetime of work. Can I say lifetime? It feels like a lifetime of work. So I'm just going to read, and just very, very briefly, because we have some other speakers as well, and then we hear for the man of the evening. So Karl obtained his PhD in biochemistry from Stellenbosch University in 2008. He then went on 2 postdoctoral fellowships, and he was appointed to the Department of Biochemistry in 2012. He has since developed a very strong independent research group, and based on that performance, he was promoted to full professor as from this year. There's some other accolades that I cannot leave out. In recognition of his work, he received the Silver Award of the South African Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology in 2016. In 2016 as well, he was awarded a Newton Advanced Fellowship by the Academy of Medical Sciences from the UK. This allowed him to collaborate extensively with UK clinicians. And if you read his biography and his career path, he speaks about being an introvert, and yet this introvert has succeeded in bringing both researchers and clinicians together around the same table, answering very important questions that impact both males and females. So we're very excited to hear it now, but that's not the end of his accolades yet. All of this has led to honorary appointments at the University of Birmingham, as well as the Medical Research Council's Laboratory of Medical Sciences, both in the UK. Now listen carefully to this one. Karl has guided 21 PhDs and MScs throughout his career to graduation, and is currently providing supervision to another 7 postgraduate students. You do not understand, if you're not in academia, how tough the process is to get to a full professorship. You have to go through various interviews, and your portfolio is really scrutinized. We are honored here tonight to gather here to listen to Karl. We're excited to hear what he's saying. And when you see him stop breathing in front and he looks at you, just show him so that he can. So I think, Karl, it's over to you. We look forward to this.
So thank you, Prof. Fielding, for that introduction. This is probably the most difficult talk I've ever had to give, and I'm probably going to break down a few times in this talk, but let's go. Okay, so I think as it already was introduced, I'm very much an introvert, so that is my happy place, outside in nature with my camera, standing here, nervous wreck, have been the whole day. But I wanted to start with a little bit more of a personal journey, just to tell you about where this love for science came from and how we got here today. So, if you believe it or not, once upon a time, I did have hair. So, back in high school, it was very clear to me that I wanted to do a career in research. That was never in doubt. But I really had difficulty deciding, did I want to do biology or did I want to do chemistry? Those were kind of my 2 favorites. And I was fortunate to participate in the National Science Olympiad in my pre-matric year, so standard 9, grade 11, whatever it is now. And I made it into the final round, and as a finalist, I was invited to the University of Pretoria for an awards ceremony, and as part of that, they included a tour of the university. I think Eric will be very glad to hear that I'm mentioning the University of Pretoria. And basically, during that tour, we sat in an auditorium, and I got introduced to the subject of biochemistry. And I remember vividly sitting in those benches, realizing that this was a subject I wanted to do. And I literally decided there and then, I'm going to do a PhD in biochem. Whew. Okay, so we kick off at Stellenbosch. I did my BSc, I did honors, I did my master's. So Morty is coming because 2005 was also a very big year. More hair. And then we started this dream biochemistry PhD, which I completed in 2008. You can see I did my work on Angora goats, and some of my friends who knew me from back here pretty much just think that I work on goats. They probably still think that's the case, but hopefully I'll convince them otherwise tonight. By this stage, I knew that I wanted to stay in academia. I was actually eyeing a position at Stellenbosch, if I'm honest, because we have a very strong steroid-based grouping here. So I stuck around, I did postdocs, we acquired our first and only child, and then the dream came true in that I was appointed to staff in 2012. So now I want to tell you a little bit about, and this is also a very difficult slide to get through for me, but a meeting that really changed everything for me. So as you know, I'm an introvert, so meeting strange people is not something I enjoy. But in 2014, John Müller, who was invited by Prof. Eric Strauss, our HOD, came to give a talk. John had met Eric at an overseas conference in 2011 in Switzerland, and Eric had offered the invitation because John really likes South Africa. I think he's on 11 trips now. And basically, Eric asked, is there anybody that wants to meet with John? So I looked at John's CV, I saw he worked on steroids, so I thought, okay, what the heck, I've got nothing to lose here. And I met with John. And John very quickly discovered that I wanted to do a sabbatical, or I was going to do a sabbatical the next year. So John took it upon himself, even though it was probably beyond his point of authority to ask at that point, why don't I come to Birmingham and do a sabbatical? So John went back home and he arranged with the director of the institute, Professor Wipke Alt, that I could swing by Birmingham on the way back from the States. So this was a little 2-day trip at Birmingham. I remember being extremely jet-lagged, but I gave this talk. That evening we went out for dinner with Wipke and John and one other colleague. And I remember Wipke being very quiet, and I kind of got the sense she was checking me out and kind of sensing, am I okay? And then once she decided that, I got offered a position, or not a postdoc, I got offered to do my sabbatical at Birmingham. And that sabbatical turned into a second one, and then a third one. The last one was in London, where Wipke is now the director of the institute. Okay. I just want to say, meeting Wipke has changed my life. She's a collaborator, a mentor, and a friend. And, okay, just this person who, you need to go look at her CV, has done so much to support my career. Right, past that. Okay, there's more coming later, don't worry. As I've mentioned to you, I'm very much an introvert. My mom would tell the story that as a child, she could pretty much take me anywhere as long as I had my box of Lego or puzzles, and I would entertain myself. In high school, we did biology practicals, and everybody would work in pairs, but we were an even number of students, and my biology teacher knew that I hated working in pairs, so I was always the one that got to work by themselves. Somehow, though, we've gone from that to where I am today, where I am a firm believer and an advocate, I would say, for what I believe is the best way of doing science, and that is team science. And what this means to me is this means collaboration. It means synergy. As Prof. Fielding introduced, I'm a biochemist, but I'm very fortunate that a lot of my colleagues are in the clinical or are clinicians in the endocrinology space. And by bringing these ideas together, I believe we can do better work. This, as an introvert especially, requires a huge amount of trust. But my experience is that if you find the right people to work with, that is the best way of going about any kind of science. And I have to throw in a photography analogy because those who know me that know that is one of my other big passions. And I think I've gone from a place in my career where this was, at the time, I thought a really nice photo. Now looking at it, I think it's absolutely terrible, if I'm honest. But by working with other people and collaborating, I believe my science has gone to kind of the next level. And we're at a point where I'm really proud of the work that we are doing. Okay, now let's actually talk about the reason we brought these steroids. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on steroids. I know that there are a lot of friends and family here, so I've tried to aim my talk at that kind of a level. When I mention the word steroids, most people don't really think about hormones and things necessarily. Most people, well, from my experience, the point of reference is anabolic steroids, so doping. And the reality is that these are man-made steroids that are made to mimic steroids which are in our body. So they're kind of hijacking that pathway. Another point of reference that most of you will have is I'm pretty sure everybody in this room has at some point taken a glucocorticoid. So your doctor has prescribed you an anti-inflammatory. And this would be something like prednisone or cortisone. And essentially that is also mimicking an endogenous steroid. Other things you might not know that you know, but I'm sure most of you have heard about testosterone, most of you have heard about progesterone, estrogen, or cortisol. These are all endogenous steroid hormones that the body makes. And what I want to highlight here is if you just look at these structures, you'll see, oh, these actually look all the same. But if we play a game of spot the difference, you'll see that the similarities that we've got this 4-ring structure, these 4 rings, but you'll see that there's some subtle differences if we look at the chemical groups that are attached to these different rings. And that's what makes these steroids different and gives them their unique function. Okay, so how do we get to steroids? Well, the reason all the steroids have this basic structure is the fact that they come from cholesterol. So cholesterol is the precursor. This has this 4-ring structure. And what the body does is the body basically has a little manufacturing plant. So we have these molecular machines, these proteins that form enzymes. And what they do is one step at a time, like we would in a manufacturing plant, they take this cholesterol and they modify it until we get our final product, which in this case is something like testosterone. Okay, so how do these guys actually work? So the analogy that I like to use when I'm teaching is this whole idea of a lock and a key. So if you think about steroids, they act via specific receptors. So I want you to think about the receptor as being a lock. And basically, when you put the right key into that lock, you can open it. And what that does is that releases a specific biological response. But if we think about the steroids are then the keys that have the power to open that lock. And if you think about a bunch of keys, normally I have my bunch of keys in my pocket, but my wife is kindly keeping those for me. Those keys, normally you have to kind of look to see what the difference is between them. Keys are often very similar. So if we think about that 4-ring structure, the basic structure is very similar, but it's these little details that distinguish one key from another. So it's those little chemical groups that we have attached to those 4 rings which distinguishes one steroid's response to another, and it distinguishes which steroid receptor or which lock can be opened. Okay, so now to introduce the steroids that I'm working on. So most of my career is based on working from steroids produced in the adrenal gland. So you all have, hopefully, 2 adrenals. They're little organs that are responsible for making a lot of the steroids, and they sit on top of the kidneys. One of the well-known steroids you will know that is made by the adrenal is cortisol. And what I'm just highlighting here, because we're going to play a game of spot the difference again, is that this is a glucocorticoid and it's got 21 carbons. So it's got these 4 rings and then it's got an additional 2 carbons here. The adrenal also makes a steroid known as androstenedione. This is the direct precursor to testosterone, something you've all heard of. But what's unique here is that if you look up here, these 2 carbons are now gone, so this only has 19 carbons. But one of the key differences between these is that cortisol has this hydroxyl group, or this oxygen, sitting at position 11. So the adrenal also makes what I like to almost think of kind of a hybrid between the 2 of these, and that is an 11-oxygenated androgen. And this specific one is known as 11-beta-hydroxyandrostenedione. So it's androstenedione, but with 11 beta-hydroxy group. So it's basically this steroid, but now suddenly this group that appears on a glucocorticoid is sitting over there. So it's kind of a mix between these two. So this is really what I've centered my career around since being appointed at Stellenbosch. Excuse me. And this steroid actually goes back a long way. So this steroid was actually first discovered in the 1950s. But what studies there did is they kind of looked at, does it act by any of these locks? Can it elicit any kind of biological response? And the answer was no. So this steroid in itself does absolutely nothing. So the theory that was put forward at the time was that the adrenal gland is making this androstenedione. This is a precursor to testosterone, but maybe the body doesn't want to have so much testosterone. Maybe there's a way that we need to regulate how much of this is being made. So what was proposed was that if we take androstenedione and we now add this hydroxy group, we form this steroid that has no activity whatsoever, and maybe this is just a dead-end product. It's kind of a way of relieving this pressure, stopping too much testosterone from being made. So after a few studies in the 50s and the 60s, essentially this steroid actually got forgotten, and if you look at any steroid pathways through the years, you'll see that it's completely missing. That was until about 2013. So we published this paper, which basically showed that this steroid is not a dead-end product. It's actually a precursor to a whole nother group of steroids. And what I want to highlight here is my favorite steroid known as 11-keto-testosterone. So this is testosterone. If we play a game of Spot the Difference, you'll see there is this oxygen now sitting on carbon 11. It's got this keto group. In the same year, we published this, a group in Ann Arbor, Michigan, who are also very active in this field. They confirmed this, and they actually measured the steroid directly from the adrenal vein, because the adrenal also makes a little bit of this. So if you look through literature, what you'll notice is that 11-keto-testosterone, so this steroid here, this is actually the androgen that fish make. So fish make that, 11-keto-testosterone, they don't make testosterone. So if you look through literature and you do a search for this, you'll find a number of publications, but they're all referring to research in fish. When we and the Ann Arbor group published this paper in 2013, which was actually really hard to do, I can't tell you how many times that paper was rejected, suddenly we convinced the endocrine community that these actually are present in humans. And interest in these has really grown significantly. So let me tell you about these steroids. So I've spent the last 10 plus years kind of figuring out how and where they are made. I'm not going to go through this in detail. I'm going to simplify it for you. So we know that this is made from the adrenal gland. This is the dead-end precursor that people thought went nowhere. But what we found is that actually this hydroxyl group is converted to a keto, and then keto-androstenedione is converted to 11-keto-testosterone. And as I'll show you in the next few slides, this is actually a very active androgen. We've also shown that keto-testosterone can be further converted to keto-dihydrotestosterone. Dihydrotestosterone is just an even more active form of testosterone. And I'll show you later that we also get another product known as 11-beta-hydroxytestosterone, but more about that a little bit later. Okay, so we know these steroids are made. We know that this is present in man. So what? Well, if we consider this whole lock and key idea, this idea that this androgen can unlock a biological response, we were the first group to show that 11-keto-testosterone actually is about equivalent in activity to testosterone. And we also showed that 11-keto-DHT is equivalent to DHT. So what this looks like, just to give you some visual indication, this is some work we did in prostate cancer. These are some of the biological responses that happen when you unlock this receptor. And what you'll see is if we give testosterone, we see a nice response. If you give 11-keto-testosterone, you see pretty much the same response. So these are all the same. Fast forward to today, this is unpublished data. This is through collaboration. We now have a crystal structure of this lock, so we have a high resolution 3D image of basically what this looks like. This is 11-keto-DHT, and we can see it binds to this lock or it interacts with this lock in exactly the same way as what DHT does. Also through collaboration, this is work from Wilbert Swart's lab. I just chose to show this because it's a very nice summary. This is what we call RNA-seq data. This is just looking at prostate cancer cells and looking at hundreds and thousands of genes at the same time in response to these androgens. And all I want you to see here is that if you look at DHT, we see this response, but 11-keto DHT gives us exactly the same thing. So these guys are basically equivalent keys. They're just as good as unlocking these biological responses. So I can't take credit for the work I'm showing you now, but since we published this and people have started measuring them in humans, what we've actually found is that women, like men, have testosterone. It's just a lot lower, because in men we have the contribution of the testes as well. But in women, in premenopausal women specifically, we've actually found that 11-keto testosterone circulates at equal levels to testosterone. And what's interesting is that because some of this testosterone in women comes from the ovary, and the ovary stops making steroids during menopause, circulating testosterone goes down in postmenopausal women. But because this 11-keto testosterone owes its origin to the adrenal, it actually is the most abundant active androgen circulating in postmenopausal women, and its levels don't really change postmenopause. Something else a question that was asked a lot when we started doing this work, to give you background, androgens, so these C19 steroids, they're actually the precursors as well to estrogens. So we think about estrogens as being female sex hormones. These are C18 steroids. They're basically androgens with a carbon chopped off and a few other changes. So a question that we got asked a lot was, can these 11-oxygen androgens serve as precursors to maybe a new form of estrogen? So this is Lisa Barnard, one of my first PhD students. And Lisa set about investigating this. And what we found is the answer was a little complicated, in that in a lab environment, under ideal circumstances, yes, we could get these 11-oxygen androgens to be converted to 11-oxygenated estrogens, but this was much less efficient, or the enzyme didn't do such a good job compared to the normal classic androgens and estrogens. And what we found is that when we tried to measure these in actual human samples, we were unable to measure them. So what we think currently is that 11-oxygen androgens, unlike normal androgens, which are also precursors to estrogens, 11-oxygen androgens are just acting as androgens. So they can only open that one specific lock and not two different locks. Okay, so I want to tell you about two different clinical implications for our work. I'm going to give you an example from a male and then an example from a female. So the first one is castration-resistant prostate cancer, and this is an image I have hanging in my office. This was actually amazing bioluminescence. I was with my friend Karl, who's in the audience, and this happened the night I found out about my promotion, so very sentimental. Okay, so the normal prostate needs the androgen receptor, so it needs this lock to be opened. So this is provided by testosterone, and in men, the majority of testosterone comes from the testes. Prostate cancer remains androgen dependent. So the cancer continues to need the activation of this receptor. And as a result, if a man has advanced prostate cancer or metastatic prostate cancer, the primary way of treating this is actually to get rid of the source of testosterone. So that's accomplished by physical or chemical castration. And what this does is it lowers the levels of testosterone in circulation, lowers testosterone in the prostate and DHT as well, and basically this receptor is no longer activated. So this lock is no longer opened. It's now stuck closed. So you don't get this biological response. The cancer stops growing, and generally this is actually very effective. But unfortunately, after about 1 to 3 years, in a lot of cases, the cancer finds a way to come back. And one of the ways in which it does, and this cancer is now termed castration resistant, is that the cancer develops the ability to take these androgen precursors, which are made by the adrenal. So these in themselves cannot open this lock, but these can be converted to things like testosterone and DHT. So we can modify these keys to a point where they are able to elicit a response. And what the prostate cancer does, it's very clever, it starts to express the enzyme, so it's making these machines that can now make these active androgens. So what we thought, and this is how we funded a lot of our early research, was if the adrenal is making this inactive 11-oxygenated androgen, maybe it can also get into the prostate, and maybe it can also be converted to these active androgens. So those of you that have known me in the department will know this was on my office whiteboard for many years. This is basically taking our precursor, took any possible combination of enzymes, so these are the machines that make the modifications, and we thought these are all potential pathways that might happen. And this was what we published. And basically what we showed that yes, indeed, you can take 11 oxygenated androgens, the precursor, and in prostate cancer cells, you can make ketotestosterone. So you can actually modify it to a point where it can open this lock in the prostate cancer. So I want to highlight one specific enzyme. So this is one specific machine. Don't worry too much about the detail at the bottom here. This is just an illustration of the pathways. And what I want to highlight here is the fact that if we look at the left-hand side, so these are our classic androgen precursors, we need to get through this enzyme, AKO1C3, to get to the active enzyme. So this is an androgen activating enzyme. Same thing with the pathway we suggested. If we have these inactive precursors, we need to get through this enzyme to get to the active products. So we're going from this inactive precursor, and no matter which way you go through the pathway, you have to get past this enzyme to get to a point where you have active steroid. So what we found, much to our surprise, is that yes, AKO1C3 can convert androstenedione into testosterone. That's been known for a long time. But actually this reaction is pretty slow. And in comparison, if we get 11 oxygenated androgens, this actually happens significantly faster. So we did the enzyme kinetics and everything. It's about 8-fold more efficient. For those of you not in the field, what that looks like is if you give this enzyme the two precursors and you look at the production of the substrates or the products over time, you'll see this is testosterone production and this is 11 ketotestosterone production. You can see there's a vast difference in how quickly these are made. And this was work that another PhD, Monique Barnard, did. So we basically have shown that prostate cancer has the ability to take these previously unrecognized androgen precursors and to convert them to the active androgens. And we've shown that this actually happens faster or better than the classic androgens. But what the prostate cancer also does is you need to remember that there's a constant production of androgen. So in order to prevent that androgen from just accumulating, the cancer also has a way of funneling those steroids out. And how it does it is it takes the testosterone and it adds a sugar group to it. And basically what this does is it makes the steroid more polar. It means it can circulate easier and the kidney can basically get rid of it, and these are excreted in urine. And what we've done is by studying this metabolism, we can see that there's also a significant difference in how well these steroids are metabolized. So testosterone is actually inactivated very rapidly in prostate cancer. But if you give the cells 11 ketotestosterone, you'll see that this is inactivated significantly slower. So the biological result of that is if we look over time, and this is based on proteomics data that Wilbert Swart's group has looked at, if we look over time, we'll see both of these can unlock that lock. They can both elicit a response. But if you look over time, the classic DHT, this response deteriorates rapidly because the steroid is being metabolized. However, with 11 ketotestosterone, it hangs around a lot longer. So the response that is elicited basically means that this lock remains open for a longer period of time. So what we have shown is that within prostate cancer, we believe these steroids are made much easier, so they're made quicker, but at the same time, they're also metabolized poorly. So what we now need to do is we need to start looking at actual measurements within human prostate tissue. That's not very easy to do. It's very difficult to get your hands on those kind of samples and also very difficult to measure them. So what we're doing currently is we're working with Prof. Jackie Snoop, who's in the audience. He works in systems biology. So basically he takes complex biological problems and pathways like I'm showing you here, and he builds mathematical models on them. So what we're doing is we're actually studying all the different bits of this pathway, so all the different parts of this manufacturing plant, and Jackie is putting mathematical equations on them and studying them. And in doing this, we can actually make predictions as to what would happen in a specific prostate tissue, depending on what enzymes are there. And also we can make predictions on which are the best enzymes we should specifically start targeting, because we can then predict where the steroids would go if we block at a specific point. In collaboration with Tia Ritzner from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, we're now doing the same approach, but now within the context of ovarian cancer. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the prostate cancer session. One more to go. I want to talk to you about a female incidence, and this is the case of polycystic ovary syndrome. So this is PCOS, is the most common endocrine condition in women. It affects up to 1 in 10 women. And generally, PCOS is considered a condition characterized by androgen excess, irregular periods, and infertility or miscarriage. So traditionally, PCOS is considered as being a reproductive disorder. But the reality is that research has shown that PCOS is actually a lifelong metabolic disorder. So women with PCOS have increased risk of all these metabolic syndromes, so insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, dyslipidemia, and liver issues. So these women are really at risk or high risk of these metabolic complications. This is some data from Mick O'Reilly, who was first author on this paper. I was not involved in this, but I like showing this graph. This is primary care data from the UK. This is from 80,000 women, looking at the risk of insulin resistance against circulating serum testosterone. And what you can see is that as testosterone goes up, so does the risk of insulin resistance. And by studying women with PCOS specifically, we've seen that androgens are intimately linked with all of these metabolic complications. So when I was in Birmingham for my first sabbatical, Mick O'Reilly, who now has his own group in Dublin, who we're still collaborating with, Mick was doing his PhD under Vibke's supervision, and Mick had a cohort of women with PCOS. So what we did is we took these samples and we measured the 11 oxygenated androgens, because these had never been looked at before in women with PCOS. And what we could see is that these previously unmeasured steroids actually made a huge contribution in our control group, but in women with PCOS, the percentage of these specific steroids went up even further. And what we could see is, as expected, testosterone went up. So this is common in PCOS. You got this increased level of androgen. But what we saw is that 11-keto-testosterone also went up significantly. And those of you paying attention, if you look at the axes, you'll see that this axis is actually a lot bigger than this one. So these actually are making a very big contribution in these women. And what we found in this cohort is that our 11 oxygen androgens were actually correlated with insulin resistance. So during his PhD, Mick and Vibke came up with this kind of proposal, which I'm going to try to talk you through. So we've spoken about the adrenal making these androgen precursors. I've taken you through AKR1C3 being an androgen activating enzyme in the prostate, but this enzyme is also highly expressed in adipose tissue. And what it does is it takes androstenedione and it makes testosterone. Testosterone is able to unlock the androgen receptor, and one of those biological responses that we get is we cause the adipocyte to actually make more lipid. So you think about fat as being a storage place for fat, but if we stimulate it with androgens, we actually get it to make even more lipid, and at a certain point, it can't hold all of this lipid, and some of this makes it into our circulatory system. And if you add excess fat into circulation, what you do is you stimulate insulin production, and what Mick showed in his PhD is that insulin actually stimulates AKR1C3 expression. So now you're making more of this enzyme, which means you can make more testosterone, and basically this becomes this vicious cycle. But what we realized after measuring and showing that these 11 oxygenated androgens were also present is we realized that we were missing part of the pathway, and that actually we need to take into account that 11-keto-androstenedione is actually an even better substrate for AKR1C3, which means we can get production of ketotestosterone, which could also stimulate this vicious cycle. So what Lena Schiffer did, Lena is a postdoc in Vibke's group, who I've worked very closely with over the years. Lena took human adipose tissue, so this is from females undergoing elective surgery, and she gave them these precursors. And what she found is that adipose actually doesn't activate testosterone all that well in comparison to how much of these 11 oxygenated androgens they make. So if you see how much 11 ketotestosterone they make and hydroxytestosterone, which I'll talk about in a second, you'll see that it's really dwarfed. Okay, so let's talk about this guy. I haven't introduced this yet. So when we think about adipose tissue, I've spoken a lot about this androgen activating enzyme, but what we also have is we have this enzyme known as HSD11B1, and what it's traditionally known for is its role in metabolizing glucocorticoids. So it takes inactive glucocorticoids, so something like cortisone. This is something you might be prescribed by a doctor for inflammation. This is actually in itself not active, but it is converted by this enzyme to cortisol, which is our active glucocorticoid. But as I mentioned earlier, these steroids are unique because like cortisol, which has this 11 group here, these steroids also have that 11. And what that means is now this glucocorticoid metabolizing enzymes can now metabolize these androgens. So I'm going to take you on a little bit of a detour from the PCOS story, just bear with me. For many years, HSD11B1, because of this activity, has been thought of as a target for metabolic syndrome. And the reason for this is if you inhibit this enzyme in rats or mice, or you knock it out completely, you actually see these increased metabolic markers. So you see reduced fat accumulation, improved insulin sensitivity, and improved glucose tolerance. So for a long time, they thought, okay, if we give 11-beta-HSD1 inhibitors to humans, we're going to see the same thing. The reality is, no. There is an effect, but it's not as big as what you would expect based on these rodent studies. And the reason for that, we believe at least, is that rodents don't make 11 oxygenated androgens. So this is a paper we published a year or two ago now, which was really like 10 years of work. And basically what we propose is that this enzyme, 11-beta-HSD1, activates glucocorticoids. So it activates the glucocorticoid receptor. This is a separate lock that gets opened, which drives a lot of metabolic things. But in a normal human being, we have this activation of 11-ketotestosterone by AKR1C3. But what we also see is that 11-ketotestosterone using the same enzyme is further converted to hydroxytestosterone, and hydroxytestosterone is not as active, it's not as good as opening this lock, and also we have keto A4 going back to hydroxy A4. So basically what I want you to imagine is if we think about the 11-ketotestosterone being the water, we're basically trying to fill this bucket, but at the same time, we've got holes in the bucket. So we're never actually going to get it full. So we are regulating how much 11-ketotestosterone is formed. However, if you're going to inhibit this enzyme, you might reduce how much cortisol is made. So you might get a good effect here, and you might be able to stop this lock from being opened. But what you're doing is you're removing these holes from this bucket, and as a result, the 11-ketotestosterone levels start to increase and this bucket starts to overflow. And when we actually retrospectively went back and looked at clinical samples from individuals that had been treated with this inhibitor, what we found is indeed 11-ketotestosterone goes up. And if you remember from earlier, androgens in women, excess androgen in women is not good in terms of metabolic complications. So we might be winning in the fact that we're decreasing glucocorticoid receptor activation, but now we're just substituting it for the activation of the AR. Okay, a side story that came out of this project, and this is something that my recent PhD student, Imken Oosland, actually observed. While we were working with this enzyme, Imken noticed something very unexpected. I've been speaking a lot about AKR1C3 and its androgen activating activity, and I've been speaking about 11-beta-HSD1 in terms of its role in glucocorticoids. And what Imken actually observed is that 11-beta-HSD1 also has the ability to take androstenedione and convert it to testosterone. So this is really changing the way in which we think about androgens being activated in peripheral tissue. And this particularly could be important in women. And I'm going to come back to this as I end off. So I now want to introduce you to a study that Vipka's been leading. So Vipka's very big in the PCOS field, and she has recruited a cohort of nearly 500 women. These were newly diagnosed with PCOS, and they had not received any treatment. And what Vibke did is basically measured all of the steroids, all of the androgens that we could in circulation. And she took those steroid profiles and through collaboration, put them through machine learning algorithms. So this is kind of an AI, if you want to think about it that way. And what these machine learning algorithms showed us is that women with PCOS are not all the same if you consider their androgens. And we actually get these very distinct three clusters. And this is much easier to see when I show you the 3D models. So each one of the dots that you're seeing here is an individual woman's androgen profile, which has been processed by machine learning. And you can see that these all cluster into these three unique groups. If we consider the steroids that are present here, this blue group is what we call a mild androgen excess. So most of the steroids are up, but they're not up by a lot. But what is prominent is that there is this red grouping. And if you look at the steroids at the bottom here, these are only the classic androgens. These are only things like testosterone and DHT. These are the guys that are being made primarily in the ovary. Whereas this green cluster is what has been termed as an adrenal androgen excess. And what's unique to these is that now we have all of our 11 oxygenated androgens, including 11 ketotestosterone, that are significantly elevated in these women. And I don't have time to show you the clinical data, but you'll just have to believe me that if we look at the risk of insulin resistance within these groups, it is the highest within this group. So we think that 11 ketotestosterone is really playing a role in driving these metabolic complications. And what we've done, so Jackie and myself, we've been developed these computational models of the steroid pathways. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to take this data and we've been able to put our mathematical model on top of it. And we've actually been able to make predictions that have shown that in all three of these cases, the enzyme AKR1C3, which is this androgen activating enzyme, is overexpressed in these women. So this logically then is a potential target for treatment. And with Vibke, we are currently working on inhibiting this enzyme. I want to show you some unpublished data. And what we found is if we take human adipose tissue, so this is human adipose tissue from females, we give them the precursors, we measure testosterone production and 11 ketotestosterone, and we then add an AKR1C3 inhibitor, we see massive inhibition with 11-KT and hydroxy-T. And that is because two reasons. I've shown you that AKR1C3 is much better at doing this reaction. And secondly, it's the only enzyme that does this reaction. However, what we've shown is that AKR1C3 is not so good in making testosterone, so this is a little bit lower. And also what we found is that it's not the only enzyme that does this reaction. 11-beta-HSD1, which is our glucocorticoid activating enzyme, also makes classic androgens. And as a result, if we target this enzyme, we can selectively decrease 11-oxygen androgen production. And we hope that that potentially has application in treating these metabolic complications in women with PCOS. Okay, so to conclude, again, me in my happy place, not here. If you take anything away from my lecture this evening, that is the fact that our classic view of androgen biology is not complete. Normally, we think about androgens just in the terms of testosterone and DHT, but what our work and many others have now shown is that this is not the complete puzzle. We also need to consider these adrenal-derived androgens, specifically 11-ketotestosterone and 11-keto-DHT. And I'm very grateful that a lot of the clinicians are now starting to realize this, and more studies are starting to measure these hormones so we can figure out what they do. Okay, acknowledgements. So firstly, funders. I couldn't have done this with all the funding I've got. I've chosen not to list all my collaborators because I'm going to forget somebody at some point. I do want to acknowledge the biochemistry department that's been my home for the last 20 plus years. Okay, the steroid grouping, we've got a very strong steroid group that I'm very grateful to work with. I also want to acknowledge our support staff. I really want to acknowledge the Central Analytical Facility, specifically Mariki, who was there from the start when me as a PhD student came up and we said, we want to measure steroids. Lindy's smiling, she remembers. I really want to thank all my UK collaborators and friends. I know a lot of them are joining online. Again, specifically Webkes Group. And then I have to thank my students. This was the hardest thing when you get appointed, is you have to let go of the control in the lab, and your students are now the hands. But I'm very grateful that I've had a very good group of students over the years, and I'm very grateful for all of them. Okay. This is where I have to breathe. So I might not go into as much detail as I'd like to, because I don't think I'm going to keep it together. But there are a few people in terms of family, very good friends. Karl, who's my photography buddy, who takes me on adventures and takes my mind off work. And this very special lady who's a very close collaborator, but also an amazing sounding board. And then my biggest supporter.
Colleagues, we really want to pause a moment. I have a very exciting task, and that is to hand over the certificate that my colleagues will provide to me. Thank you, colleagues Sibu. Dean Bertie. In South Africa, we like to say all protocol observed, but I work closely with the Department of Defense, and they say, I stand on your protocol at the beginning. I stand on your protocol. Colleague Karl, I am mandated to present this certificate to you on behalf of Senate. And Senate is the central academic body of Stellenbosch University. By this certificate, we confirm that you are a full professor of Stellenbosch University. Colleague, our staff and students, our full profs in a special way, are driven and guided by the e-care values of the university. The first one, excellence. Excellence is about optimally live up to your own calling and your specific purpose in terms of your potentialities and opportunities. Excellence is about practicing a sound work ethic. It's about living with determination, dedication, and discipline. The second value, compassion. It's about concern and care for others, including creation. It's about sympathy, feeling with, empathy, feeling yourself into the skin of others, and in a pluralistic, diversified context, also interpathy, to think yourself into the shoes of other people from other cultures, ethnicities, languages, orientations, and to feel yourself into them and their positions. Thirdly, accountability. It's about giving account of your decisions and policies, your research, your teaching, your societal impact. And accountability implies transparency, truth and truthfulness, trust and trustworthiness. And then, fourthly, respect. Now, it's about the spectacle. Put your spectacle on again. Respect. Look again. Think again. Listen again. Consider again. And thereby recognize the dignity, the worth, the esteem, the value, the honor, the splendor of other people, of plants, of nature, of animals. Consider consistently whether your actions advance dignity in personal and professional domains, in public and planetary domains. And lastly, we have the value of equity, from the Latin quietus, to say it's about equilibrium, It's about building a world where some don't have too much and others too little. Equity is also about avoiding extremes. It's about living with balance, in Afrikaans, evenwig, level-headedness, level-heartedness, level-handedness. Equity is the capacity to embrace complexity in all its forms. Prof. Karl, your person and work reflect these values. Your inaugural lecture tonight provides a window into your research on the role of steroid biosynthesis and metabolism in human health and disease. You say steroid hormones play essential roles in metabolism, in the stress response, in immune function, and reproductive health. And continuously you said it, and your dean said it, as an introvert by personality, you nevertheless make a convincing case for teamwork in local and global context, for multidisciplinarity, for reaching out. And what I like is for the translation of fundamental research into clinical application. So your work indeed makes a healing impact on society. Collega, we congratulate you. We honor you, and we look forward to keep on journeying with you and to take photos with you. And if you want a smiling photo, and if you want everyone to smile, then we just say testosterone.
Colleagues, friends, it's my pleasure to say a few words of thanks. I'm Eric Strauss. I'm the head of Department of Biochemistry and a very proud colleague here tonight to know that Karl has made our department his home. He says as an introvert, you see how alive he became the moment the science came out. You know, all the introversion went away, and that's how we experience him. So a few words of thanks, of course, to Trish for supporting and being there by his side through everything, and his mom as well. Sue, thank you so much for being here. Father-in-law Mike and Angela, thank you so much. His sister-in-law. I know your sister and brother is attending online, so to Heidi and Gunther from Chicago and Belfast, respectively. Hello to you, and thank you so much for also joining. And then, of course, you've heard a lot about the UK team, to Wipke and John. A very special thanks. He spoke about John. John just takes over, and you saw how John actually influenced him. He said, you know, Eric invited John. No, John invited Eric to invite him, and just showed up. And it's been just wonderful to see how this has played out. Talk about teamwork. We see how as scientists we meet other scientists, and these things just naturally grow into something beyond us. And it's wonderful to see this lecture here tonight. So Karl, thank you so much for doing this. Stop crying, you're going to make me cry. So lastly, thanks also to the team behind the scenes from corporate communication and marketing, to Amira Brown and Krista Davids, to Chuma Diakala, and of course Jonathan Dale Blankenberg as well. And Justin, thank you for helping with the recording for the people who's online. For posterity, you can always go and watch this on YouTube. You're thinking how the university makes money now. We make it off our YouTube channel with our inaugural lectures. There you go. And of course, thank you so much, Suzette, always being there in the back. Suzette Els from Dean's office for helping us put all of this together. Thank you for everybody who is here tonight. Karl's group sitting there, he thanked you, but thank you so much for you guys as well. I see a number of faces. Maybe I'm pointing not only in the right direction to the colleagues as well. Thank you for all of you to show up on this showering day. Please come and enjoy this evening and celebrate with Karl outside. So once the procession has left, you're welcome to join us outside for a glass of wine and some eats. Thank you so much.